Boom, we are live, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to the Nolan Hawkeye Anthony YouTube channel. And I thank all of you for being here, wherever you may be, and of course, however you may be listening. First and foremost, I want to thank you guys for watching all the content this year. I don't take it for granted. I do this as a hobby. I really enjoy doing it. I've said many times that with these fan YouTube content creation for sports, especially college sports, the one thing that you get that is different is, of course, that it is coming from a fan's point of view, and it's not biased in the same way. There's no tethering or push behind certain takes and opinions on certain topics. Now, there's a lot of YouTube channels that definitely say that it's a fan sponsored thing, but of course, they're still sponsored through, various either podcasting networks or, um, uh, I don't know, newspaper companies or publications of some sort. So for me, I really want this channel, no matter what, to remain authentic and honest uh, from my perspective in my opinions and takes to share with all of you. So, you know, like I said, I don't take it for granted. You guys watch the channel. You guys may not always agree with me. You guys may get frustrated with me with some of my opinions, and that's fine. That's what this is all about. So anyways, I just wanted to say thank you. I did whip out the blazer since it is that time of year. We are done with the regular season. And I'm not sure that I've done a video like this before. I'm not sure why, if I haven't, but man, I cannot believe that another football season is already done. It just shows how quickly time flies. I've said this many times, but as I get older, the seasons go by quicker and quicker and quicker. It's unreal. But the video that I'm going to be doing today, I alluded to it in previous videos, is detailing whether this season was a success or a failure, and where was it a success and where was it a failure? Because, of course, as a blanket, I can throw a big, broad blanket over the season, which I will. I have no problem doing that. But I think the more accurate thing to do is to break it up into parts to detail the successes and the failures of the season. And I even have a note card here full of stats compared to last year, especially on the offensive side of the ball. So your boy is doing the research, so you don't have to. So before we get into any of that, I want you guys to hit that subscribe button. Let's get this channel to 2,000 subs. That's the next goal. Like, comment, uh, or dislike it. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it helps the algorithm of the video. Um, And of course, I try and respond to all the comments. And without further ado, let's get into this. So, first, I want to talk about the schedule and just say, very broadly speaking, was this season a success? And for me, when I look at the season as a whole, the criteria that I put into place regarding whether the season was a success or a failure is a few things: how they performed compared to last year, the schedule, what the schedule actually was when the season was all said and done, was, how difficult or easy the schedule was. And then, of course, really looking at the preseason expectations. And this is probably the biggest aspect for me personally, is talent evaluation and preseason expectations. By the way, I can't believe I forgot this. The reason why I'm not doing this video uh, after Iowa's bowl game is very simple. I thought about it. It took me a day to think about. I knew in my gut kind of where I was leaning, but the reason is that in this day and age, the bowl games are less and less accurate, important. They're important, but not in the same way that they used to be. They're important as far as getting your young guys and your roster for next year valuable reps and practices. But from the standpoint of, one team having their full squad and another team having their full squad and them facing up and the best man wins, that's not how it is any longer. Jamari Harris will not be playing in Iowa's bowl game, which, by the way, I personally don't understand that. Jamari Harris, to me, he is not one of those Iowa prospects like a Lucas Van Ness or a Jack Campbell or a TJ Hawkinson or a Tyler Linderbaum or a Tristan Wirfs that is so solidified to where more tape, especially against a quality opponent, especially at the DB position, another quality game against a quality wide receiver would not help. Even if you look at the remainder of the games, Maryland, Nebraska, and whoever Iowa is likely going to play Ole Miss, I think, possibly. We'll see. I'm not putting any predictions on it, but either way, Jermari Harris would have had 3 solid games to put solid tape on to add to his resume. So I don't understand it. I think he could have improved his draft stock just by playing in those 3 games and performing really well. He hasn't had a season that has been so spectacular. So I don't understand it. Now, he could have been maybe injured and he wanted to get healthy. If that is the case, it's slightly understandable. But this is my point, guys, is uh, Iowa was kind of one of the few remaining programs to not be affected by this situation where guys that are going to go to the NFL or they're going to hit the transfer portal don't choose to play for Iowa. Iowa definitely has had guys already this year, last year, the year before leave early for the transfer portal. That's not new. But as far as going to the NFL and not playing in the remaining games, Iowa has been some of the few schools to remain strong and have as full of a roster as possible. But again, just to put a bow on it, the transfer portal, so many guys leave for the transfer portal, both for Iowa and their likely opponent. The NFL, there are tons of guys. Last year, Tennessee, there were multiple players who opted out of that game for Tennessee, and of course, they still shellacked Iowa. I can't remember if there were any Iowa guys that decided not to play. I don't think so, but I could be wrong. Um, Maybe there was one guy. There might have been one guy for Iowa that chose not to play. Like I said, I'd have to go back and see. But it's just not what it used to be. It will still count as far as Iowa's record, and of course, I'll do a post game video for that, and I, of course, will make a summary of the season, a smaller, condensed summary of the season after the game, win or loss. But I'm not going to do it as sweepingly as I am in this video. I think it's more accurate for me to do it just for Iowa's regular season rather than waiting for the bowl game to commence. So, with that being said, Iowa, was this season a success or a failure? It was a failure. Okay. You guys aren't going to be surprised by me saying this. I am very happy that Iowa beat Nebraska, albeit in an ugly manner. I do agree with Kirk Ferentz's comment after the game, and I posted it on Facebook. He posted or he re-quoted a famous Albert Einstein quote. Let me see if I can find it actually. So here it is. I found it. Just walking off the field, Albert Einstein quote kind of hit me about quote, not everything that can be counted counts, and then not everything that counts can be counted. I think sometimes that explains the way things go in sports. That's what's so interesting. As much as you want to analyze it, slice it, dice it, cut it up, slice it, dice it, cut it up, all that stuff. I know statistics are important, but sometimes you just have to find a way to win, and our team did that. I agree with that. Now, I did not love how often that was the case for Iowa the previous 2 to 3 seasons. For most programs, that is not sustainable. And there were so many stats that the Fox or ESPN would put up about that. How Iowa was one of only a handful of teams that would average this amount of points and this amount of yards and still win this amount of games. They were defying the odds. But for like a game here or there, it's fine. You do just have to, good teams do find a way to just win football games. And I wish Iowa had done that against Michigan State and UCLA and Iowa State for that matter. But I think Kirk Ferentz, and I don't want to make this video too much about this, but I think Kirk Ferentz really is far, and it's hard for me to say this given that Iowa has won 9 meetings, and Iowa has won what is it, 7 straight? I'd have to look here. So Iowa has won 2 straight, and dating back to the game November 27th, 2015. So this would have been the 2015 season. Iowa has won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the last 10. And they have won dating back to 2013. And of course, since Nebraska has joined the Big Ten, I believe Iowa is leading this series. But going back to 2013, Iowa has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 wins and only 2 losses. So they've totally dominated this. Crazy enough, the 2 wins that Nebraska has had against Iowa in that span, a 37-34 victory and in 2014, and a 24-17 victory in 2022, have both been in Iowa City. But I just think, especially in recent years, I think Kirk Ferentz plays far too, and again, it's very hard to say this given Iowa's success as far as the win losses go, but I, I think he has played it way too close to the vest. Even though Nebraska is much more talented than they were a year ago, and they always have talent, I've always said that. I still think Iowa was the more talented team this year. And it kind of seems like Kirk gives Nebraska this undue bias, this undue charity and confidence in Nebraska as a football team. Even this year's team was, what were they, a 6-win team? So, but as far as the season goes and why the season was a failure, if you look at, I'm going to get the schedule pulled up here. Number one, Iowa's roster was super talented. Okay. They had the most returning production in the Big Ten. But I did say before the season that Iowa under Kirk Ferentz does tend to underperform in seasons that they have a bunch of returning starters coming back instead of being even better. Not only are they not even better, they usually take a step back. And I don't know why that is. I don't know what the reason for that is. Maybe it's that the talent that Iowa has, there's always and especially with Kirk as the head coach, there's always like a peak to how good they can be. And 9 times out of 10, when they have a really good season, that group of players has reached their peak and that Iowa roster has reached its peak. And so them coming back for the following year, there's nowhere to go but backwards. I don't know. It's really hard to pin the nail on the donkey with that one. I don't I outside of that I don't know for sure what it is. Um, but Iowa had a ton of talent, guys. They just to name a few guys that will likely be drafted in this year's draft: Sebastian Castro, Jay Higgins. I even do think that Nick Jackson has a good chance of being drafted in the sixth, seventh round. Jamari Harris has a good chance of being drafted. Logan Jones will be drafted. The only guy who came into the season with draft expectations that I think took a step backwards significantly would be Luke Lachey. Luke Lachey was the only guy, and even still, because of Iowa's um, uh, success at the tight end position, and given Luke Lachey's NFL lineage and his measurables, he still might get drafted. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets drafted at all. Because a lot of scouts will just look at the fact that Iowa has had terrible quarterback play and they'll say, oh, it's understandable. But even in previous years, Iowa tight ends have found a way to still get yards, even with bad quarterbacks. Sam Laporta, well, maybe not TJ Hawkinson. Sam Laporta would be the main one. So this team had a ton of talent, guys. And the preseason expectations across the board was that Iowa needed to win 10 games, 9 or 10 games in the regular season, and they needed to compete for a college football playoff spot. The college football playoff was out of reach after the loss to Michigan State. It was done. Iowa had 3 losses. It was over. You cannot lose to a Michigan State team and get into the college football playoff. Okay, unless you win every other game on your roster, on your schedule, including the game against Ohio State. Um, Not only the guys that were returning, but you look at guys that took a step forward. Caleb Johnson. I mean, if you would have told me before the season that Caleb Johnson was going to run for 1,500 freaking yards, I would have put upwards of a 70% chance that Iowa was going to play in the college football playoff. I would have even put a 60 to 7% chance that Iowa was going to play in the Big Ten championship game. That is how much of a step forward him having 1,500 yards would be for most Iowa teams. So it's not just the guys that came back, it's also the other guys externally that took major steps forward. Caleb Johnson would probably be the big one. Were there some guys that took steps back and then took steps forward, like Xavier Wampa? Yes, but by and large, this team was very talented. And I think you can see that in the games that they won. Illinois State, they beat 40 to nothing. Troy 38-21, Minnesota 31 to 14, Washington 40 to 16, Northwestern 40 to 14, Wisconsin 42 to 10, Maryland 29 to 13. The only team that they defeated that they didn't win by double digits was against Nebraska last game of the season. Everybody else they shellacked. Iowa has one of the better point differentials in the Big Ten. Okay. Even better than Illinois, who is ahead of them. This is the final standings of the Big Ten, by the way. Oregon first, Indiana second, Penn State. Well, they're tied for second, Indiana, Penn State. But Indiana, for some reason or somehow, got the tiebreaker. I'm kind of interested to see why they got the tiebreaker because Indiana's only loss was to Ohio State, and they didn't play Penn State. So they probably went by point differential. That's probably what they. I don't know what the tiebreakers are, um, but that would be my guess. So Iowa ended up finishing sixth, which is not terrible, but again, they were good enough to finish top five. Okay. Um, and I think they could have been one of these four teams. If I look at the other teams and I look at Iowa's talent, Iowa stacks up. Yes, maybe not completely offensively, but as a whole, special teams, defense, Caleb Johnson emerging, the talent was there. Okay. Um, the schedule. Okay. Outside of the win totals that Iowa had, that was a really strong point differential. Okay. The schedule, and I always tell you guys this, don't look at the schedule before the season. It doesn't matter. Yes, I mean, I guess you can look at it to kind of get yourself hyped as far as, oh, we got a favorable, okay. But in the grand scheme, it doesn't matter. The only time that you can realistically start to judge your schedule is 4 to 5 games into the schedule. And this schedule ended up being tougher than people thought preseason. Iowa had a top 25 strength of schedule and strength of record. Let me see if I can get it pulled up here, actually. Let me pause and get it pulled up. So I've alluded to this a few times throughout the season. Iowa this year was better in FPI for most of the season than what their record indicated. They're just behind Iowa State, and for much of the year, they were actually ahead of Iowa State in FPI. They finished 24th. A lot of this was due to their last game against Nebraska. But they finished 24th in FPI. And let's see here. Um, if I go to resume and I go to, let's see here. Just got to find Iowa. So their strength of schedule ended up being 39th, so it did not end up being what it was earlier in the year when I was checking it. It definitely took a few steps back, but still not bad. And their strength of record is 37th. Okay, I think most people were thinking that their schedule was like like one of the easiest in the entire country. So and that just wasn't the case. So they did really, for them to really beat down a lot of the teams is not bad. Now, I just want to preface it. It's not as though they had the toughest schedule. By no means did they. It was just a little bit better than it was. So that's really the main reason, guys, why to me this season as a whole was a failure. Okay. They did not meet expectations. And yes, that's a very critical, broad blanket that I am throwing this sweeping generalization at. One more small thing. I think Kirk Ferentz failed, and I made a video on this already talking about Cade McNamara. I think Kirk Ferentz failed in sticking by Cade McNamara for so long. Even before the season, I said that I would have gone with Brendan Sullivan or even considered going with Marco Lainez, because Cade McNamara just had not done enough to warrant having this sort of loyalty. I understand wanting to have a return on investment. I get that. Hell, Kirk Ferentz even had a recruiting violation to recruit Cade McNamara, if you remember. I didn't remember until I read upon it today. But still, guys, still. He could have moved off Cade McNamara. Do I think that Iowa would have beat Ohio State? No. They need to get better at the quarterback position, and they need to get better passing the ball, which I'm going to detail to you guys with my stats. But I do think they may have beaten Iowa State, putting in a different quarterback in the second half when the offense was starting to sputter out. Okay. I do think that they would have had a chance against Michigan State. Okay. Now, they did lose to UCLA with Brennan Sullivan in there, and he played like garbage. But Michigan State and Iowa State, I do think that Iowa would have had a significantly better chance of winning that football game had. Right, so let's go over the team stats here. Okay. So I'll just have that in the background. I'm not going to show you guys every single one because it's going to take too long to get it. I don't want to pull up all these tabs. So scoring offense, Iowa finished. So let's start with offense first. And we're going to get into smaller areas, categories in which Iowa succeeded and in which they failed. Okay. And yes, Kirk Ferentz. I would say Kirk Ferentz not or being so loyal to Cade McNamara is a broad failure. Um, Scoring offense. Iowa finished 66th in average in the entire country and averaged 28 points per game. And that was an improvement from 2023, in which they were 132nd. I thought they were last, but they were second to last. Usually, the NCAA team, the NCAA site, you can go back to previous years in the stats, but for whatever reason, some of the years it's hard to find the archived stats. But there are some other websites that do have team stats that you can find that are archived. So Iowa jumped up in points per game almost double. They jumped up. What is that? With 13. Yeah, 13 points roughly, give or take 12.8, I believe, or 12.6. Okay, that was a success. Tim Lester came in and found a way to be more efficient in scoring the football, to be more creative in scoring the football, and ultimately just score more points. He was successful in that regard, and kudos to Iowa for that. A lot of it, of course, was Caleb Johnson, who had 21 flipping touchdowns, which I'll get to him momentarily. But, you know, uh, Tim Lester was willing to put Brendan Sullivan in there for sub packages, and I really liked his confidence with that and his creativity. Once upon a time, Brian Ferentz did that with Tyler Goodson being in the Wildcat, but then for whatever reason, he just stopped. All right, total offense. Iowa finished 113th, and they averaged 331 yards a game. Now, offenses in college football in the modern era kind of ebb and flow from year to year. So your overall ranking is not necessarily completely indicative, okay, as much as the actual numbers are. So they averaged 331 yards a game. In 2023, last year, they were 132nd, second to last, and they averaged 234.6 yards a game. So Iowa almost had an uptick of 100 yards more per game this year than last year. And almost all of those, or all of it, can be directly linked to the improvement in the run game. Okay. That is solid. Okay. Now, that number is a solid and a negative, because while the run game improved, the pass game did not. But just looking at it in a vacuum without splitting it up into rush and pass, it was a success. Okay. Passing offense, Iowa finished 130th, and they averaged 131.7 yards a game. In 2023, they were 130th as well, and they averaged 118.6. That I would still say was a failure. Okay, even though it improved, it didn't improve enough. It was marginal, and it wasn't enough to propel Iowa forward in magnanimous, consequential ways. Okay, it was not enough. It needs to be better next year. Iowa needs to find a quarterback that can at least average 200 yards a game passing. In this day and age, there is no reason that you shouldn't be able to do that. I mean, definitely be over the 150 mark. I mean, being under 150 is not good, especially for an offense in the Big Ten, guys. That is not good. Um, Rush offense. Let's see if I have that. In 2024, Iowa was 20th in the entire country, and they averaged 199.8 yards a game, almost 200 yards of rush yards per game is unbelievable. That is a huge step forward. My concern, though, is that it's going to be very difficult for Iowa to duplicate that, if not exceed that next year. Caleb Johnson was a once in a generation talent. And I've said all year long that it's going to be very difficult, or excuse me, I said all year long that it's hard to know how much of this is Tim Lester and how much of this is Caleb Johnson. In my opinion, I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. It was partly Caleb Johnson, it was partly Tim Lester. Okay. They both were a good match. If I had to lean towards one, I would say it was more Caleb Johnson than Tim Lester, but Tim Lester definitely improved. And I said in my most recent Cade McNamara video that I'm happy that the run game improved before the pass game because that is what needed to improve first. Iowa is a run first team. They will be no matter what. And the run game is what everything else stems off from with the offense. Sorry guys, I'm getting too warm. I gotta take my blazer off. So I am definitely happy about that. In 2023, Iowa averaged 115.9 yards a game for 109th in rush offense. Iowa took a huge step forward. Caleb Johnson finished fourth in the entire country for 1,537 yards and 21 tubs. And I'll show you guys individual stats momentarily. Lastly, total defense, Iowa finished 17th. They were very close to elite. I I I would say that Iowa's defense was mostly elite this year, but they were more inconsistent than they have been all year long or in a few years defensively. And they were not a season long elite defense. Okay. I would not say that they were a season long elite defense. They definitely struggled on the road, but the final stats, they were a great defense bordering on elite. That's what I would say. Okay. Scoring defense, they were 10th, giving up 17.8 points per game, which that is elite. Okay, that is elite. But if you put the entirety of all the defensive stats, I would say they were great, approaching elite, at times elite this season, but overall not elite, if that makes sense. So let's look at the stats here. But as far as the success, I would still say that Iowa's defense was a success. It's very difficult for me not to. Okay. I can't do that. I can't, I don't have it within me to say that Iowa's defense wasn't a success. In a vacuum, yes, Iowa took steps backwards from last year, but they were still really freaking good. They were good enough to be a college football playoff defense. Okay. The problem did not lie with the defense. Okay. I'll tell you that right now. The failure, obviously, the quarterback position, just not good. Um, the ratings 115, 158, 122 for all three quarterbacks. Brendan Sullivan finished with the highest purely quarterback rating. I don't care to look at their QBRs. I mean, I guess we can. So Cade McNamara had a QBR of a 37.6. I said before the season that whoever Iowa's mostly starting quarterback is, if they could have at least 15 touchdown passes, it would be a success. 15 touchdowns to like 7 or 6 to 8 interceptions would be fine. And no, they didn't get to that. Brennan Sullivan finished with a QBR of a 53.9. I think he's probably going to have the highest QBR. In fact, I know he does. Because I recently looked at Jackson Stratton's. His was 50.4. So with the two quarterbacks, they threw about this. They threw the same number of passes. Um, Brendan Sullivan was slightly more accurate, but he made more mistakes. He had fumbles, he had interceptions, he had 5 sacks. Jackson Stratton only had 2 sacks for minus 16 yards compared to Brendan Sullivan's minus 28. He had 0 interceptions. So, and the average, yes, Brendan Sullivan's average of 9.8 is definitely better. His completion percentage of 68.6 is better. I would say that the odds on favorite for next year's starting quarterback to start is definitely Brendan Sullivan. I think it is his job to lose with the external expectation that Iowa lands a transfer portal quarterback of quality. Okay. That not being considered, just looking at the quarterbacks that Iowa has, Brendan Sullivan is the odds on favorite. You never know what step forward Marco Lainez could take if he doesn't decide to transfer, which I think is a decent chance. I'm just being honest. I do think there's a decent chance that he decides to transfer. I hate to say it. I don't know what he was expecting when he came to Iowa to not sit at least 2 years, but um, I think he's going to transfer. I do. I just know how college football is, and quarterbacks no longer have the willingness to sit 2 to 3 years and then get the starting nod. Um, but the good news for Marco though is that Brennan Sullivan only has 1 year of eligibility left. But at this point, I would say Jackson Stratton might be ahead of Marco Lainez. Now, that could easily change. He's not like far and away ahead, but he's still ahead. And Marco Lainez missed out on crucial development time this year with an injury. But I do think that Jackson Stratton and Marco Lainez both have high upsides. I think Brendan Sullivan has a ceiling, but he can definitely improve ever so slightly with his passing and decision making and seeing the field with his time with Tim Lester. And we'll see how that goes. Still a lot of time, guys, a lot of time. And Iowa will definitely go to the portal to look for a quarterback. Uh, I don't know if you guys know this, but former 4-star athlete slash quarterback that Iowa brought in the 2024 recruiting class, James Razor, has been moved to wide receiver, which grand scheme, I think probably was the right decision. He's super athletic, and Iowa definitely can bolster up the room. But I don't think that the wide receiver room is in that bad of a spot going into next year. They have a lot of guys that got a lot of time this year. Again, with the caveat, we'll see who transfers and who doesn't. But if everybody comes back, a lot of guys got some valuable experience. But Tim Lester possibly looked at James Razor and said, "No, he is not a quarterback. He's not." So I don't know. I really liked the intangibles that James Razor had, but we'll see. He's likely going to stay at wide receiver. Caleb Johnson, we did his stats, average 6.4 yards a carry, absolutely magnificent. 21 touchdowns, 1,500 yards. Kamari Moulton really took a nice step forward. Um, Caleb Johnson will likely leave for the NFL. Kamari Moulton is going to be the odds-on favorite to be the lead back next year. Um, the guy really has just been super impressive since joining the Iowa roster. He was super under recruited. Josiah Patterson, he's a good complementary back. I do like his vision and his burst, but I think the lead back will be Kamari Moulton, and Iowa has some tailbacks in the waiting wings. Xavier Williams and Brevin Dole from this previous class. So we'll see what happens with that. Terrell Washington Jr. Iowa's kind of had him go back and forth between being a wide receiver and a tailback. I think they need to make a decision and be done with it. I think he probably is going to end up just being a wide receiver though. But he did have 11 carries this year for 31 yards. So I do think it is a success what Liddell Betts has done with the running back room. Okay. Brendan Sullivan, of course, had 144 yards rushing. Not bad. Receiving, Jacob Gill was one of the few bright spots. Um, I did not expect him to have 382 yards receiving. Great for him. Um, we'll see what he can develop into next year with another year under his belt. Luke Lachey, I think, was not a success. He was injured a lot. I thought he was going to have at least a 500-yard season. He didn't. He had zero touchdown grabs. Um, Maybe he's lost a lot of athleticism from his injury. I don't know. I don't know. Zach Ortworth was a bright spot. Reese Vanderzee was a bright spot. The true freshman wide receiver, 176 yards, although he did get injured late in the year. I think Iowa's tight end room is in good spot with Zach Ortworth and Addison Ostrenga. They got a lot of talent in there. But just look at all the wide receivers that are going to be coming back next year. I mean, you have Jacob Gill, you have Reese Vanderzee, hopefully Seth Anderson. We'll see. Jarriett Bowie, Dayton Howard. I mean, tons of guys. Terrell Washington Jr., who only had 3 receptions for 7 yards. It is going to be really interesting. I think Terrell Washington Jr. is a running back. I think his physique is more akin to that of a running back. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with him. Um, I think with Caleb Johnson being gone, Iowa could use him more at the running back spot than the wide receiver room, personally. Because, you know, Iowa, even though Kamari Moulton is looking good and can definitely take a major step forward next year, Iowa's going to need some depth. Um, and we don't know if Brevin Dole and Xavier Williams are ready to take steps forward. Uh, as far as special teams go, the season was a success. Reese Dakin, I said before the season started, if he could finish the year with averaging 42 to 43 yards per punt, the season would be a success. He did better, 44.2, which was better than Torrey Taylor in his freshman year, who averaged 44.1 yards per kick in only 8 games. Reese Dakin did this across 12 games or whatever it was. Yeah, what would it be? 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, 12 games. Um, defense. Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson, of course, had big years. The defensive backfield struggled at times. Ethan Hurkett had a nice season, 6.5 sacks. Um, I don't know if he could come back with the COVID year. I'm kind of confused about that. I've read things that say anybody who was in the recruiting class of 2020, that would be the last recruiting class that would have a COVID year available, which he would fall under that. So, but I don't know. I've read differently that he might not. Um, Or no, he could be. I there was a article that came out from Hawk Insider. I would have to see who all those guys are, but he had a nice year all the same, 6.5 sacks. Um, Deshaun Lee, I think, played good. Xavier Wanpa had an up and down season. He finished strong towards the end of the season. He didn't get discouraged when he was benched for Cohen Entringer. Um, Max Llewellyn had a nice season. I'm really looking forward to his upside. I think he could have a huge season next year, 5.5 sacks. And then, of course, Aaron Graves had 6 sacks, which was awesome. Um, so that's pretty much it, guys. There's a lot of good things to look forward to for next year. But there are some things that Iowa needs to improve on. They need to improve the pass game, and Iowa needs to get back to being more consistent defensively. Um, the defense is going to be strong next year, but it's going to be tough replacing Nick Jackson and um, and Jay Higgins. I mean, they were very talented linebackers who have a ton of tackles between the two of them, but Iowa's done it before. Seth Wallace is a great linebacker coach, and Iowa will have two linebackers in Jaden Harrell and Carson Scherer that have been in the waiting wings for multiple years now. And I'm very interested to see what they have in store. So, of course, a lot of this is going to depend on who Iowa lands in the transfer portal looking ahead to next year, what guys leave for the transfer portal, talent acquisition, and talent management, keeping the guys on your roster. Because that's the thing, guys, is in this day and age, even the guys that did get playing time, they're going to hear from other schools that are going to say, "Hey, you're good enough to come play here. We want you over here. We got more money for you over here." So, we're in a crazy day and age for college sports. All right, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Hit that like button and subscribe button. And last but not least, DBAP, don't be a pussy, will out in facts or feelings, because your feelings just matter. I love you, Hawks. See you guys next time. Bye bye.